Right now in Tech Radio, the future now.
Hi, I'm Artemis. I am a computer-generated AI voice, and you're listening to Tech Radio.
Every week online and on air with RT Radio, we bring you the very latest in tech from Ireland and the world. This is episode 1050, looking ahead to a brand new year and what tech stories are going to delight us, including some big wins we're expecting, some big losses, of course, and, just for good measure, some conspiracy theories. Let's get into it.
From techcentral.ie, this is Tech Radio with Dusty Rhodes and Niall Kitson.
I'm Dusty. Joining me as always, our editor-in-chief, Niall Kitson, and a special guest with us as well this week, the man that we love so much, Tech Central contributor Jason Walsh. How are you, Jason?
I'm very good, Dusty. Thanks for having me on.
No bother. Happy New Year to you, and a Happy New Year to you, Niall, as well.
And to you, gentlemen.
So let's start off then with what we think is going to happen. And I think one of the big stories is going to be Mr. Trump, who's going to assume office shortly, and digital money.
Digital money. Well, 20th of January, 19th of January is when he takes office. So 20th of January apparently is when we're going to start seeing some changes. We've already seen some changes when it comes to Bitcoin. All he had to do was come out at Bitcoin conference last July and say America is going to become a crypto powerhouse, which sent the value of Bitcoin not quite to the moon, but it certainly did it no harm. And now apparently Bitcoin is going to be added as part of the Federal Reserve. So we'll have gold and we will also have Bitcoin as a legitimate asset. Whether that's PR or not, just to keep the bros on side, possibly. I mean, Lord knows America can afford it. Seeing as they're very good at managing their debt. I don't know. I can't say I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with crypto because we know the value of it is going to go up because we will have a sympathetic US administration that will be anti-regulation, and we have a culture of crypto bros who will be quite happy to pump up the value and indeed have their own pump and dump schemes through meme coins. But anyway, that's another thing. It's
kind of conflicting, isn't it? Because it's kind of like Trump is going, yeah, I'm really going to support crypto by not regulating it. Government loves regulating things. And he's going to go, no, I'm going to keep their hands off. And the crypto people are loving it. And that's why it has done so well since the election results in November. Jason, you've got thoughts on crypto. From what I remember is you're not a fan.
I'm not a fan. I mean, I realize that people have made money, but people can make money on anything. Early members of Charles Ponzi's now famous Ponzi scheme, what used to be called in his day a robbing Peter to pay Paul scheme, they made money. The thing about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, so-called, is that its sole purpose would be to inflate and keep inflated the price of Bitcoin. That doesn't make any economic sense. I think if it does get done, it will be in a fairly desultory manner. They'll put a few billion into it and just forget about it. I think it's more of a PR stunt than anything else. But it's quite clear that Bitcoin, and I'm sort of singling it out, and perhaps Ethereum specifically, are getting some credibility. You mentioned the pump and dump schemes on the meme coins, Niall. I mean, those are obviously a catastrophe, and that is precisely where regulation is required. Whether or not there's an argument for Bitcoin or Ethereum, I'm not convinced, but it's certainly more than there is for kind of these kind of spurious tokens. But, I think the important thing is that I really would like to see this kept away from things like pension funds. It's just far too risky. We've seen, I think, a spot ETF has been launched now, so you actually can just invest in Bitcoin on the stock market if you feel like it. Institutional investors are clearly getting involved, and people have made fortunes. But what if it all turns out to be a pump and dump? What happens to your pension if you retire and suddenly it's not there?
We've been there before, though, with pensions in 2008, and I think was it 2012 or whenever there's a big crash, pensions always take a hit.
That was in a market that was properly regulated, not well enough, frankly. But we're practically talking about the Wild West here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe what they're going to do is they're going to make it I think they will make regulations around how you invest in it, but maybe not in actually regulating Bitcoin itself. I think it's going to be a very interesting year on that side of things, because it's not just Bitcoin, but I think blockchain is going to kind of become of age, and it could be used for more secure voting, possibly. There's talk about using it as digital ID and stuff like that. And just the whole concept of blockchain. I love the fact that there's a public record there, and then you've got your private key, and you need to put the two of them together in order to prove whatever happens to be. It could be a value of money, it could be information or a piece of data or whatever it is. But I just think it's going to become more and more part of our lives.
Yeah, that's probably true. But I mean, it's only valuable in the sense that it is public. I mean, it's one of the complaints about crypto, of course, is that it's used for crime, and because it's completely anonymous. It's not anonymous, right? People need to get that into their heads.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's interesting about blockchain, on the positive and the negative side, is that if you want to transfer money or information from one part of the world to the other, there are a million more efficient ways to do it. The SWIFT network, whatever, text messages, anything you like. Blockchain is extraordinarily bad. It's slow. It costs a lot of money to operate. It's huge energy costs. So where's the benefit? Well, the only benefit is this public ledger. So if you want to have a transaction that is in the public record, immutably in the public record, and then that is where blockchain has value.
We'll see what happens throughout the year on that. Tied in with that, I suppose, really is big tech and how they're going to work with Trump when he takes office. And then, of course, we have the EU and all kinds of regulation. What do you see on the regulation front, Niall?
Yeah, well, that was one of the first real disappointing things that happened at the end of 2024 was that, big tech has this tacit relationship with the left. In the States, possibly because an awful lot of the workforces in the big tech firms tend to be left-leaning. They tend to be highly educated. They tend to be guys, and maybe there was an element of virtue signaling as well. And we know that the big tech firms have fairly strong and are fairly vocal about DEI. So it makes sense that they're left-leaning. However, we are now seeing Mark Zuckerberg went to Mar-a-Lago. Jeff Bezos has contributed $1 million to the Trump transition. We have also, of course, seen Elon Musk allegedly donate $100 million to the Trump election effort. Whether that actually happened or not, or whether it was just spiel and shtick, I don't know. Probably not. So on the regulation front in the States, we are going to see a dismantling of pretty much any and all regulation by design. This is part of Trump's platform. Regulation is bad for business. So let's get rid of as much of it as possible. And that extends to, environmental concerns as well. I mean, his whole policy on energy is drill, baby, drill. Despite the rest of the world sort of moving in a completely different direction. Arguably, China is still a laggard, but we're seeing an awful lot of things like solar farms popping up in China as well. So they know that coal and fossil fuels aren't going to be a long-term concern, and that there's value in being seen as a first mover in renewable energy, which is something I think they're actually getting pretty good at. As for what happens in Europe when it comes to regulation, I think there will be a reaction in that Europe will have a look at what's going on in the States and will end up being a handbrake. Will end up being the one body that will say, do you know what, we've got a risk-based approach to AI. We're going to hang on to it. It's pretty dang good. If you want to do business in the EU, you're going to have to start playing by our rules. And I think that's pretty much what's going to happen with regulation. Europe will end up carrying the load on it.
Let me ask the pair of you then about Trump and Musk and the relationship there. There's a bromance. Do you think that's going to continue throughout 2025, or do you think we're going to have a breakdown and a divorce?
I mean, they're both self-interested, quixotic, mercurial characters, so the opportunity for blowouts and explosions are enormous. But at the end of the day, they're both, trying to make money fundamentally, or more importantly, actually, in both cases, I think they both crave power. So I think they'll remain bedfellows, at times easy, at times uneasy. It's a very interesting era, that's for sure. I mean, I actually think it's a return to form. It's kind of return to the horrible natural order of things, the return of Victorian morality and the separation of the ultra rich from the rest of us. It's interesting that Niall talks about the kind of the decline of the left. I mean, I agree, but what's sad to me is that it demonstrates that the left shouldn't have tried to rely on the largesse of donors and things like that. It should have been engaged in democratic actions from the ground up, things like, on community level organizations, trade unions, all of those things that actually gave it a bit of heft and popular power. I do think that the kind of the app economy is actually very politically worrying in a lot of ways. And we'll come to this when we're talking about one of our other topics later on. But I think that we really are starting to see a little bit of public pushback against the power that these billionaires, and not just as individuals, I don't want to demonize them particularly, but the power that these platforms have. And I think that's only a good thing.
Yeah, there was an interesting point that I keep coming across is that Democrats are paid to lose because their agenda is fundamentally against what their donors want. So conservatives don't know how to govern and liberals don't know how to win seems to be the mantra in America. I mean, they've lost 2 elections to a really dullard populist, and they don't seem to have learned anything the first time. So one thing that really, when it comes to Trump and Musk, I mean, they've both got main character syndrome. They both think they're the most important people in the room. And that's only going to last for so long. I mean, Trump goes through people like Billy O. And yes, he is absolutely entranced by money and he is entranced by Musk as a character. And God knows, I mean, you talked about Alonia a couple of weeks, Dusty, that, Elon is pretty much not quite outstaying as his time in Mar-a-Lago, but he's certainly raising a few eyebrows. And this is not a sustainable relationship. So I had a really good explanation of Elon Musk, and this is something we know already. And this sort of explains Musk's fascination with Trump, in that Musk is a cuckoo. He finds companies that are doing something really well, buys into them, shoves out the founders, and then proceeds to make them profitable off government subsidies. And that's what he does. So if he wants to maintain, his businesses, he has to be in with government. And that means he has to be in with Trump. And it clearly means that he saw which way the wind was blowing, because we know that amongst all the misinformation that Musk was sharing during the election, one of his fascinations was with the betting market and with a website called Polybet. And he was forever posting results from Polybet, which was kind of a summary of all the markets. And guess what? Polybet proved to be the most accurate indicator of who would win the election and by how much. I mean, Trump's victory on the popular front seemed to be quite slim. I think it's 1.7%. But in terms of the Electoral College, it was pretty much a blowout. I mean, Democrats were absolutely swept off the map.
That's the way the numbers break down in the States. Let me just do a quick straw poll before we move on then with the marriage of Musk and Trump. Do you think that they will still be best friends by the end of the year? Yes or no, Niall?
I'm going to say the relationship will be strained. They might require a bit of counselling.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Jason?
I completely agree. And Niall's absolutely right. It's all about those juicy government contracts. These freebooting entrepreneurs always turn out to be rent seekers in the end.
Yeah, I think Musk will have found his match and will not be able to beat Trump, and he will be out of the inner circle by the end of the year. All right, let's move away from politics and talk about when politics breaks down and we have war. Do you think we're going to see a war in 2025?
Well, the much talked about over the last 8 years relationship, such as it is or may not be, and it's all speculative, between Trump and Putin is where this all comes down to. Because, is Trump going to come in and put an end to the war in Ukraine to the satisfaction even partially of the Ukrainians? I don't know. He says he will. It seems rather unlikely to me. Is he going? Putin seems to be gambling on it. Israel, in terms of its conflict in Gaza, it is definitely gambling on getting greater support from Trump than it did from Biden, which is rather surprising because they got plenty of support from Biden. But I think it's kind of they like the culture around Trump. But it's interesting the way wars sort of spin out of control very rapidly. We had what was going on in Israel and Palestine. Syria was obviously a paper state. It had no real authority other than the kind of, the dictator and his minions. But a group that had been fighting for years just seized the moment, seized the opportunity. They knocked over the state. It turned out to be quite hollow. Then following that, they were only able to do that because Israel had destabilized Hezbollah, which had been supporting the Syrian state. Then subsequently, Israel moves into Syria, to protect, ostensibly anyway, its Golan occupied territory there, and to, as it says, destroy the chemical weapons plants and so on. Russia has still got its ports in Syria. So we have this kind of massive instability that I wouldn't have predicted a year ago, and it's all because of a different war. So one war can very quickly become a second.
Here's where I get into conspiracy theories, and it's probably down to when I was a child, right? There was a book lying around the house. It was called The Late Great Planet Earth. And it was basically just kind of predicting the end of time. And the two things that stuck in my head with it were, one, that the last great battle will be fought on the banks of the Euphrates River, which of course is in the Middle East. And that one of the world's great leaders who will be behind the end of the world will be famous for his hair. Trump. Now, I know I'm being childish and a little bit silly about it, but watching everything that's going on, I kind of go, I wonder what's going to happen next year. But if it was to happen, I think it's going to be unlike anything that we have ever seen before. I mean, none of us lived through World War II or World War I, but we know it from our history lessons in school. World War I was all trench warfare, and then World War II was more taking war to the civilian population, which was a new thing. I think this time round, the war will be fought mainly online.
Well, I mean, we've seen it since the start of the Ukraine war. I mean, the main target for Russia initially was, okay, we'll seize land, but one thing that we will do is we will destroy the country's infrastructure and just basically make it uninhabitable. So they don't necessarily have to worry about a body count so much as making the place unlivable. That seemed to have been the strategy to limited benefit, as it turns out. And it has exposed the Russian military as being not quite the behemoth that we thought it is. Based on who you believe, their stock of tanks is incredibly depleted. If you look at the numbers of artillery systems lost, they're up around 22,000 systems lost at time that we're talking about. They're using troops from North Korea. They've exhausted the troops that they got from the prisons that they opened up on the promise that, okay, you go serve for, I think it was even 6 months or something like that. We'll let you off the rest of your sentence and you can go home. So Russia has tried an awful lot of stuff. And looking at what has actually been more effective, I think it's been the leveraging of the cyber operations. And for Ukraine, I think it's been the leverage of consumer drones that have just become a delivery for explosives. And we are finding that very, very small drones have been taking out very, very large tanks. So the old model of, okay, who loses the more soldiers, it doesn't seem to have had the same I don't want to say impact, but it hasn't defined the conflict.
I know what you mean, yeah. I think the drones have been a huge feature of all of these wars, and rockets that are being sent from one country into another. Infrastructure, they've been targeting finance, they've been targeting energy, they've been targeting health services. I mean, here in Ireland even, our own health service was targeted. Now, it wasn't to do with war, but it was people wanted money, but nevertheless, those kind of big infrastructure things, if you take them out, it has a huge effect on the population,
Yeah, and one of the most important pieces of infrastructure, of course, is subsea cables. And if you've ever tried to use the internet via satellite, you'll understand why subsea cables matter, and they're very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. And all you have to do, as we've seen recently in the Baltic Sea, is you drag an anchor along the seabed. If you know where to drag it, it cuts right through the cable. So it's a danger. And then I was saying to Niall just the other week, Jason, about the cloud. We're so reliant now on our mobile phones and the internet and the cloud that what if one of those cables was cut and we had no internet?
Well, we've seen small versions of this over the last couple of years, not through war, but things like the CrowdStrike problem. And anytime a major app goes down, everyone goes absolutely mental. Well, imagine what happens if you aren't able to do your job for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 3 months. So yeah, we do have some inkling. It is time we built a bit of resiliency, and I think that questions should be asked about whether or not everything should be thrown into the cloud. I know it's convenient for people, and I know that on the accounting side, people love the fact that it decimates their capital expenditure and they push everything into current operating expenditure. But to be honest with you, that's just an accounting trick. You're still spending the money.
True. I have a lot of data that I had been keeping in the cloud, but now I'm making sure that I have a backup copy locally here of everything, just in case. Anyway, that's my view on war for 2025. Maybe it'll happen. Fingers crossed it won't. Jason, let me ask you about Intel. This is a big breaking story kind of towards the end of 2024. Tell us more about Pat Gelsinger and manufacturing chips and where it all went wrong.
I mean, the fact that I bring this story up isn't going to help with my reputation as an increasingly vulgar materialist who's only interested in the physical world. But there is a reason for that. And I think we talk about apps and the cloud and all this stuff, and we just forget that underlying it all is a lot of physical stuff, from the stuff that we dig out of the ground, that we crush up and melt and etch into chips, and then everything else that goes with it. Intel had been falling behind. It was the world's biggest sort of chip company for God knows how many years, decades, 3 decades. But it was having its lunch eaten by AMD, and then subsequently with the AI boom, particularly NVIDIA. And a few years ago, it got a new chief executive who had been an engineer in the company, had gone away somewhere else and come back, and he was going to save it. And his plan, it was a bold plan, and it was a daring plan, and it was a risky plan. And he said, we're going to keep making our chips, and we're going to do a better job, we promise. We're going to make AI chip. But what we're also going to do is we're going to take on Taiwan Semi, who make most of the world's chips, physically manufacture them in the foundry. We are going to open our foundries. We're going to build new foundries. If you want to have your chips built, we'll do it for you. It's going to take us 5-10 years to get this up and running. It's going to cost billions. But when we come out the other end, oh boy, we are going to be huge. The market's heard capital expenditure. What? You're spending money? And Intel's share price absolutely tanked. I think it's down by more than 60% over the last couple of years. He kept saying, trust me guys, trust me guys. Eventually, the board just lost confidence. They've booted him out. No one knows who the new CEO is going to be, but there is talk of actually splitting up the foundry division and completely severing the link, selling it off, turning it into AMD type company that has no production capabilities. This is, if that happens, you can take a view that a company should manufacture or it shouldn't. I think it should, but you could have the other view. But in any case, if Intel was to turn around and just shut that all down, flog it off, that is shocking waste of hundreds of billions of dollars, if not more.
Yeah, I think what happened this year was everybody looked to NVIDIA and thought, why aren't we that? Why aren't we doing that? We make exactly the same thing. Why aren't we $1 trillion company? And that's where an awful lot of the patience evaporated. And I mean, this is a story with potentially massive effect on the tech sector in Ireland, because as we know, Intel has a very large operation out in Maynooth and have done for decades. And the further investment in a fab in Maynooth was seen as a real commitment to their core offering and to Ireland. Now, I think they have a new fab in Germany. I think. Yeah, there was a competitive process to decide where they're going to put their next fab. And again, another sign that, we're all about physical things. There's almost an IBM style effect. IBM got out of making computers and decided they were going to go into services instead, which is now where they make their money. Is this what Intel is going to do? But what services can Intel offer? Like, are they going to turn into a data center maintenance company? I don't think so. So what does Intel do if they get out of chips?
I mean, what Intel could become, and I'm not advocating it, is that it could become an IP company that simply designs chips and has other people manufacturing them, much in the way that AMD does or NVIDIA. But, you have to ask yourself, is that really the right strategy for Intel? Because the Intel architecture that we know today has 2 problems. First of all, the version of it we're using, x86-64, is based on AMD's extensions, not Intel's. Intel's Itanium many, many years ago failed. No one wanted it. And second of all, it's already being outpaced by ARM designs in the mobile phone market, and then Apple Silicon. It's a kind of private semi-ARM chip. Microsoft's talking about moving to ARM. Everyone. So, I mean, what is the value of an Intel x86 design if the world is sort of moving away from that architecture in the long term? I thought that having the foundry, taking on Taiwan Semi and becoming just a major manufacturer of chips would be a very valuable thing for Intel, and it would be of strategic importance to the US and to Europe, which is very concerned, Dusty, going back to your point about war in the South China Sea.
And indeed, in Chinese manufactured chips, and then the whole thing. It is interesting how it all kind of ties back together again. You mentioned NVIDIA, which kind of gets me onto AI. Now, believe it or not, we don't have very much to say about AI in 2025. I'm just making a little note. The word to watch out for with AI is agentic. All right. That's the thing that's going to come to the fore, I reckon, during the year. It's from the word agency. And essentially is what it's saying is that AI will develop so that it's making decisions without humans and even making decisions with other AIs that are making decisions. So it'll be very interesting to see how that develops as we hand over more and more control over to AI. And I remind you of my phrase of last year, AI, man's last invention.
Actually, I'd like to throw something in there that I found the other day to do generative AI. There's a company called TCL. I think they sell televisions, but they've started in on making their own content, which is being generated by Gen AI, and they've got a couple of short films up on YouTube. And my God, they are horrific. It's like watching a really bad cutscene from a computer game from 10 years ago. I mean, the faces are there. But they all have that awful waxy complexion that AI images have, and they're really awful at lip syncing. So you will find lips moving, but jaws not moving.
Yeah, but there's no bottom to like what people will put up with. Like the marketing industry is already flooded with this stuff. I was in a shop recently and there was AI generated pictures in frames of dogs on the toilet reading newspapers. And I was also recently researching oil-filled radiators because my apartment's so cold. And the picture illustrating it was a woman in a kind of skimpy top, almost looking like she was chained to a radiator. It was like something from a horror film. So people are just generating this stuff, banging it out without even thinking about what it's saying. And away we go.
I think we'll see that develop and finesse over the year. Let's move on to social. So there's two things I want to ask about social. One is X, formerly known as Twitter, and then Blue Sky v Threads. Both of them seem to be doing incredibly well. Again, like we were asking with Trump and Musk, Niall, do you think we'll have a winner between Blue Sky and Threads?
Well, there are plenty of losers. I mean, as a user, former user of X, formerly Twitter, and I think everybody should refer to X as X, formerly Twitter. Let's not pretend that Musk has any sort of control over the discourse there. Apparently, somebody did an analysis, and it's as many as 70% of Musk's followers are bots. So it just goes to show the extent to which people are actually interested in what he has to say. The people that know him love him, and everybody else seems fairly indifferent. Unless you're a Russian bot, in which case they do indeed love him. Looking at what X has become in the aftermath of the US election, where it went from being incredibly partisan, with voices on the left sort of screaming what sounded like common sense, and voices on the right being incredibly partisan and owning the libs, being their sort of their raison d'etre. It has now turned into a bunch of bots and conservatives looking for a target, and there's just nobody there. It's just pure engagement farming. Let's put something up. Let's say Elon Musk has changed what happens when you click on like or retweet on something like that. They've changed the animation. Of course they haven't. It's just pure engagement farming. It is if you thought it was a hellscape before, it is much, much worse now. And even some of the people on the left have been completely exposed as being absolute nut jobs. They can't seem to process the idea that Trump won the election. And it has turned in this whole sort of, but it was really narrow on the popular vote. It's like, you've been talking about how the American electoral system works for 4 years. And just because you've lost an election, you have actually lost your mind. So apparently X, formerly Twitter, has lost something in the region of 20 million users, which in real terms, I mean, when you have a site with 400 million users signed up, when you can say that a sizable chunk of that are actually bots or people with multiple accounts, that's actually pretty substantial. Blue Sky, I moved over there, and it's lovely. It's quite nice. You can decide what communities you want to be a part of. Now, I mean, everybody follows everybody back. That just seems to be the culture. But I haven't come across much in the way of, in uncivil behavior. Now, there was a flock of conservative voices onto Blue Sky, and they seem to have been smothered or moderated out of existence. So they went back to X and have been shouting back into the void ever since. It's pretty funny. Threads have done well out of the decline of X. Blue Sky has done extremely well out of the decline of X. It's pretty much a matter of time before we start seeing how Blue Sky manages with moderation at scale, which is something Twitter really struggled with. But a final story coming out of social media is an investigation into TikTok, which of course is on the verge of being banned in the US, as we've been talking about. The parent company ByteDance, Chinese company, was given the option of sell the US operation or be shut down in the States. That's the choice. They're still appealing it. They are, however, being sued by the Attorney General in Kentucky, a gentleman by the name of Russell Coleman, who managed to get access to some internal documentation from TikTok, and it discovered that by design, it is there to promote maximum engagement, but also addiction amongst its younger users. This is a direct quote from some of the documentation. TikTok was specifically designed to be an addiction machine, targeting children who are still in the process of developing appropriate self-control. So thank you, Mr. Coleman, for that appraisal. Not the only person. Kentucky is not the only state that's suing. New York, California, the District of Columbia, Illinois, Louisiana, Massachusetts. There's a list. There's a whole list. TikTok, is it on borrowed time? I don't know. If it gets past the January deadline and gets a new owner, I honestly don't know. I think it's too much a part of the zeitgeist to be rid of, and I don't see any competitors on the horizon. So maybe they're playing a little bit of chicken with the US government. Maybe they are waiting on an incoming Trump administration to actually just sort of set things aside a little bit and go, do you know what? Come back to me when you've got an acceptable solution.
Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if they were banned on the 19th of January, but then a deal was done and then they returned in whatever form that was done. It's a huge market for them. I don't think the world will fall if TikTok is not available in the States. I think TikTok will continue worldwide, in Europe, in China. I think it's interesting what you say about it being an addiction machine, targeting children who are still in the process of developing appropriate self-control. That means that I am a child still in the process of developing appropriate self-control. Because
you know what, Dusty? We all are. I strongly encourage you to look at an essay by the PR man Ed Zitron, published last month in late December, called his website's Where's Your Ed At? And the article is called Never Forgive Them. And it's about how social media companies have just been absolutely locked into destroying our brains. Absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure that children, it's a question of children having self-control. I'm pretty worried about the adults having no self-control.
I would be the same. I had YouTube Premium for a time during the year. All right. So I had no ads. And I just found myself very much recognizing that I was addicted, because when I had 10 minutes, I go, I'll just have a look at a few shorts. And I'm literally scrolling through and watching them for 5-10 seconds. Maybe I'd watch one for 30 seconds or whatever. And in the back of my head, the sensible adult side of me is going, what are you doing? You're not interested in this. This is not a topic that you're interested in. Like, when you scroll through YouTube, there's tons of stuff there that you might have a mild interest in at the best, but there's nothing that you actually need unless you search for it. Do you know what I mean? But I found that with the shorts, I was literally just scrolling through, and before you know it, I'd be an hour on it. So it is addictive for whatever little thing it's ticking over in the brain.
Well, my crack this year has been reaction videos, and in particular seeing Gen Zers become acquainted with the likes of Kate Bush, which is just, it's bizarre. You see people watching Dire Straits for the first time, and they're like, how have I never heard? It becomes this fascinating alternate reality where bands and that we've grown up with just seem completely alien to a new generation. It's ridiculously compelling viewing.
Let's move on to our last topic of what we are going to imagine what's going to happen in 2025. It's not a good one. It's electric cars.
Yeah, and kind of weird that I'm going to tackle this one, seeing as I don't drive, but there you go. So there is as part of the government climate action plan, there was a target of getting 30% of the national fleet. That's, cars, buses, absolutely everything with four wheels plus, to move to electric. And the goal was 945,000 vehicles, 30% of the national fleet. It has not been a good year for sales of EVs. In fact, sales of EVs have gone down this year in Ireland by quite a stretch. And there's a couple of reasons why it has gone down. I mean, if you try and buy a second-hand car these days, cars are expensive. We had basically a few years where there wasn't a market, and now there is again. And if you want to buy an electric car, there isn't that second-hand market just yet. If you want a second-hand car, not only are you going to buy a petrol car, you're going to pay more than you would have bought a petrol car before. So that's kind of a twist in the way the market has gone. Of course, we've got range anxiety still. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. If you're on the East Coast / heading into the Midlands, you're going to be fairly well served. If you're heading west, you're pretty much on your own. So that's been a massive problem as well. So I don't know, as somebody that doesn't drive, it's trivia to me. You guys are both motorists. What do you reckon?
Yeah, what do you're an occasional driver. I probably drive the most out of the three of us. Jason's an occasional driver. Where do you sit on electric cars?
I'm an occasional driver. I used to be I'm a car lover, but I don't drive because it just doesn't suit me to drive. I live in an urban area and I have good public transport. I love cars and I don't love sitting in traffic. I'm not insane. I don't like EVs because I see them as gadgets, and I think I'm not sure that like car weirdos like me matter, but a lot of car people don't like EVs because there's no differentiation between them. They're all basically the same. They all feel the same. They all move in exactly the same way. They're such simplistic machines that there's no point in buying a luxury one or a sports performance one. They're all ridiculously fast, etc., etc. And I think I'm overwhelmed with technology in cars anyway. I hate touchscreens in cars. I want them to bring back buttons.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And I noticed something interesting. Some stats that you guys dug up said that though the market had flatlined in the Republic up north, they're still going well. I don't have the numbers to hand, but I would say that be careful with that because that's from a very low base. Only 2.3% of cars up there are electric cars. And I think that EVs have long been reliant on government subsidies, whether direct or indirect. That brings us back to Elon Musk. And, I think that the early adopters have already all got them. On the second-hand car point that Niall made, which is tremendously important, if you think about it, where do cars come from? I don't know anyone that's ever bought a new car, or very few. Everyone I know buys a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old car, but they have to come from somewhere. Well, the answer is they come from fleets. So it's company cars, ex-rental cars, things like that. Once those have all switched over to EVs, you might start to see a substantial second-hand market. But until they do, dribs and drabs simply are not enough.
I had an idea when I was chatting with Niall about this a couple of years ago, and I think the range anxiety is down to, well, what happens if I run out of electricity or battery power? And it's exactly the same as what if I run out of petrol? And it must have been like this in the early days of cars because we didn't have petrol stations everywhere. Anyway, my idea was that every single petrol station in the country should have some kind of a fast charging point or a number of fast charging points where you can go in and in 5 minutes, it gives you half the battery power, 25 or another, 30, 40 kilometers to get to wherever you would normally do. And if they did that, I think that would cure the range anxiety and an awful lot more people would get into it. That's a really good point, though, Jason, that you made about the fleets and stuff like that. Because yes, if they brought in a law where, say, fleets had to be electric, where public transport vehicles had to be electric, like taxis had to be electric, do you know what I mean? And it just becomes more and more of an everyday thing. I only know one person who has an electric car, and that's my brother-in-law, Paul. And my other brother-in-law, actually, Colm, has one. The pair of them both say that their running costs, have slashed, as into the cost of the electricity to fully charge the car and to get whatever 400 kilometres is a fraction of what they were paying in petrol.
Yeah, I mean, I've never met anyone with an EV that doesn't love them, but then you got to, that's kind of an early adopter thing. These are people who love those things and love the savings. I mean, I hate to be a terrible bore, but I mean, my driving has reduced to like 3 or 4 trips a year simply because I have access to really good public transport. I think I'm not against EVs, but I just think that a better solution, where possible, I realise in rural Ireland it's not possible, where possible, get those trains built.
I'm going to say, just on that one, we are... not so much that we are not going to meet our target, because that's a given. It's mathematically impossible at this stage. But I think we will continue to see a decline in the sales of EVs, exactly because that second-hand market just isn't there yet.
All right, listen, we shall wrap it up there. The bad news for the pair of you is that I'm making a note in my calendar to come back to both of you early December, later on this year, 25, and see which one of the predictions actually turned out to be true.
If your predictions are right, Dusty, we won't be having this conversation next year because we'll all be dead.
There you go. Niall Kitson and Jason Walsh, as always, thank you very much.
This is Tech Radio with Dusty Rhodes and Niall Kitson.
That's it for our show this week. We're back again next Friday with a brand new show online for you and on RT Radio 1 Extra. Tons, of course, happening. We've got the Young Scientist exhibition and we've got CES in Las Vegas. So do join us for that. In the meantime, please do share our podcast with a friend. Tell them to look up Tech Radio Ireland on Apple, Spotify or YouTube for all the gossip and conversation on tech in Ireland. Until next time, from myself, Dusty Rhodes, and from Niall Kitson and from Jason Walsh and all the team at techcentral.ie, take care.
Remember, you can get the latest Irish tech news with hourly updates, daily newsletters, and more at our website, techcentral.ie. Share the knowledge and invite a friend to listen. Search Apple, Spotify, or YouTube for Tech Radio Ireland, or listen with RTE Radio 1 Extra. Tech Radio is produced by dustpod.io for techcentral.ie. From me, Artemis, live long and prosper.